Okay. All righty. I see we have some people joining us already today. We are going to officially start the webinar in just about a minute. Let people get here, get settled. If you are on with us, you will see that there is a poll question up on the screen. It's a very basic poll question. What are you hoping to learn from today's event? If you could take some time and answer that, we would be very grateful. Alrighty. I see we have some people answering our poll questions, so I think it is time to kick off today's event. On behalf of the entire team at E&E Leader, my name is Jessica Hunt, and I am one of the owners, and we welcome you to 5 Trends Shaping the Future of Demand Response in 2025. A very, very hot topic as always, but I feel like especially this year and the current state of not just the United States, but the world. Before I turn today's presentation over to Peter and Molly, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items with all attendees. This event is being recorded. You will have the opportunity to watch it again, listen to it again at a later date. So if don't feel like you need to take notes, sit back and listen. And that brings me to the next point, that Anel will be providing a copy of all of today's presentation, the entire slide deck, to attendees after the event is over. So be on the lookout for a follow-up email from them. We have set aside some time during today's event, as well as after the presentation, to take questions from attendees. So feel free to submit questions during the presentation, during the conversation, as well as when we start diving into more questions at the end of the event. If we do not get a chance to answer your question during the live session today, the team at Enel will follow up with everyone with all of the questions and all of the answers in a post-webinar email. If you have questions during the event, please put them in the Q&A chat or the Q&A widget. The chat button is just for you to say hello, let us know where you're joining from, and we thank you for being here. But enough of my talking. If you haven't answered the question on the screen, please take another minute or so to answer that. But at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Molly and Peter. Molly, mic is yours.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's great to be with you all virtually. We have some good content to go over with you today, but this is a live event. We want it to be as much of a conversation as possible. So please, like Jessica said, ask questions and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Quick intros. I'm Molly Gerard. I lead our flexibility business for Enel North America. I've been in the industry for over 13 years. I have a strong passion for clean energy, so excited to talk about these topics today. Fun fact to provide, I'm getting pretty stir crazy after this long winter. So this weekend I plan to go for a long bike ride and get some seedlings in the ground in my garden boxes. So little preview of what I'm up to. Go ahead, Pete, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Holtzoffel. I lead our utility demand response business at Enel in North America, or Enel in North America. I've been with the company for over a decade, working in a number of different roles, from marketing to regulatory affairs, and now leading our utility business development efforts over the last several years. I'm passionate about clean energy. A fun fact about me is I grew up on a small island off the coast of New Hampshire, and I grew up right next to a tidal grist mill that was built in the 1700s. And I've been, passionate about renewable clean energy since I was young as I can remember as a result of that experience. So excited to talk more today and, bring some of that excitement and enthusiasm to the discussion.
Thanks, Pete. All right, so let's go over our agenda today. So we're going to start with the challenges facing the grid right now today, and then what is being done to address them. Then we're going to discuss some demand response solutions to some of these challenges. So for those of you less familiar with demand response, that's going to be our topic of focus today. How is demand response solving these challenges? Then we're going to talk about 5 trends in the market today that are shaping how demand response is evolving. and next steps for the continued growth of demand response. So from customers, utilities, policymakers, a lot of you on this call today, what can we do to continue to grow these opportunities for flexible loads? And then we will have time at the end for Q&A. Like I mentioned, we will get to questions throughout the session, but please put them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. So before we dive into the topic today, I just wanted to give an overview of Enel. So Pete and I both work for Enel North America. Enel is a global multinational utility that offers flexibility, software, and resiliency and power solutions, and is really focused on renewables and decarbonization as a utility company throughout the globe. Today, we're going to talk mostly about our demand response business in North America, where we are a leader in the country. We have over 4.8 gigawatts of capacity under management across over 10,000 sites. So we really operate at scale in these markets. Globally, Enel has over 9 gigawatts of capacity. So we have programs all throughout the world for large flexible loads. We paid almost $2 billion in revenue to our customers that participate in these programs since 2011. And we have over 80 demand response programs across 31 states and 2 provinces. So there's a lot of different nuances on a regional basis when it comes to demand response. We'll talk a little bit about that today. So let's kick things off by talking about challenges. I think a lot of people talk about the energy transition like in the future. We talk about 2030, 2050. But I really want to emphasize that these challenges we're talking about are happening right now. They're happening today. The energy transition is here. These are things we need to address now. And the energy future is really evolving at a very rapid rate as we speak to you today. So it's a really topical time to talk about these different trends. So high level theme, we're going to talk about surging demand. This is probably not new to a lot of you, but we are seeing record growth in demand for after, years of efficiency across our load curve. We're seeing record demand growth, mostly from data centers, AI, electrification, EV charging. We're also seeing that coupled with aging infrastructure. So we'll talk about that. The wires that transport electricity, things that connect your house, it's older than ever, and it's not evolving fast enough to meet these this surging demand that we're seeing. So we need a digital grid, we need a smart grid, we need to evolve the infrastructure that meets these demands. And then extreme weather. So we're seeing more and more extreme weather events due to climate change that puts a strain on our system, on this aging infrastructure I just mentioned. So all 3 of these things together create quite the challenge for the electric grid to modernize and improve reliability for consumers.
Great, thanks, Molly. And then, from the utility side, utilities are always looking for ways to better serve their customers with more flexible, reliable, and cost-effective approaches to meet demand. And one of those ways is by offering customers an opportunity to participate in demand response programs. These days, we typically find utilities fall in one of 2 buckets. So the first bucket, utilities have little or no DR, or maybe some large customers on legacy interruptible rates. So the question from them is typically, how can we get more DR leveraging software, hardware, and experience that a service curtailment service provider like Enel can provide? And then we think about utilities that currently offer DR to their commercial industrial customers. But for these utilities, they're looking for ways to get more advanced. So the question from them is how can they expand their demand response offerings from maybe a single DR product to more of a suite of products, offering a range of grid services, including capacity, energy, and ancillary services. Something that we've seen more typical of wholesale markets to date. Now we're seeing these vertically integrated utilities in more regulated regions looking for that similar suite of demand response capabilities and potentials that they haven't historically had.
All right, so let's dive into why demand response. Why is demand response a good solution for these challenges we just mentioned? So I like to start with a little bit of an economics 101 lesson, right? So if you think about supply versus demand in traditional economics, to balance any sort of system, you can either increase supply or decrease demand, or decrease supply and increase demand. Those are your levers to create a truly balanced system. And the electric grid, to function properly today, needs to have supply and demand in balance at all times to avoid blackouts, constraints, things like that. Traditionally, the method for utilities and markets is to ramp up supply if demand goes up. We need more power. We need more power plants. We need peaking power plants. We need more capacity to meet this demand. What demand response comes into the equation and says, well, why don't instead you think about creating flexibility on that demand side? It's not something that is fixed. It's not something that needs to be met at all times. People have flexibility around when they consume power, and loads are getting more and more sophisticated. So leveraging the demand side reduces the need for putting new power plants in the ground. It is a cost-effective way to manage the system. It's a lot cheaper than building new supply, and it's a very sustainable way to balance the system. The cheapest megawatt is one that's never produced and never used, and the cleanest megawatt is one that's never produced and never used. So this thinking about things on the demand side is new for a lot of people in the energy industry, even though demand response has been around for a while. We're continuously having to educate policymakers, customers, utilities that this demand side lever is super powerful and something we really need to lean more on if we want to be an effective energy transition and a reliable energy transition. We can't just keep building more and more supply. There's a limit to that. So in addition to the limit to the amount of supply we can build, it takes time. It takes a lot of time to build new power plants, a lot of resources, a lot of money, which can raise costs to consumers. Energy from coal and nuclear can take 6 to 15 years to plan and construct. Even from natural gas, you're looking at 2 to 4 years. Renewable plants are the quickest. Enel also builds a lot of renewable plants. We're a renewable energy operator in the United States. But bringing new generation online requires investment and time. So like I mentioned, we're talking about these challenges that are happening today and now. So demand response is a really powerful, cost-effective tool to manage some of these constraints without a lot of this need for additional CapEx and additional steel in the ground.
And Molly, when you think about traditional resources too, we're not talking about like having to deal with interconnection queues and connecting to the grid for new resources. Correct. These are resources that are already connected today, and demand response can come to market and deliver resources within a year, and that really takes into consideration designing what the program is going to look like, going out recruiting customers, and then being able to actually curtail them. So just how quick it can come to market is it doesn't have to deal with a lot of even the kind of early stage challenges that can even get to just to the point of actually being able to start building something.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so according to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, DR participation in the 7 U.S. wholesale markets increased slightly in 2023 to represent 6.5% of wholesale market peak demand. So we are continuing to see demand response growth. And here at Enel, we're continuing to advocate for increased demand response adoption in every market. So the map you're seeing here should look familiar to you. This is our DR footprint map we showed in the beginning. And we want to add much more color to this map. There's a lot more work to do to make that happen. But there are signs we're headed in the right direction. Demand response is on the verge of a breakthrough in 2025. And 5 trends that are setting the stage for its growing role in the grid's future is what we're going to talk about today. So we can, now we sort of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about. We can pause for a second and take a look and see maybe if we have some questions here to ask, to answer.
So I see one who's representing Enel in Canada. We have a team in Canada. We are active in the Alberta market and the Ontario market. You can see on this map. And we're open to more opportunities. There's a lot of flexibility potential in Canada as well.
Great. We also have a question about what are some of the reasons why there's so much gray still on the map. And so, and first, to be fair, there is more demand response happening out there than what we're showing here on our map, and certainly across other wholesale markets and other utilities that are offering demand response today, or as I mentioned, some that have legacy interruptible programs or rates for customers. But what our goal is to make a lot of these, bring more DR to market where utilities are currently doing it today in a more reduced capacity or in a more limited way, and then also make these wholesale market opportunities more attractive. So like a place like SPP, we don't currently operate in the SPP market, and that's partly because there is no capacity market that tends to be sort of the gateway drug to demand response. And the wholesale market for ancillary services and energy just isn't as attractive for most customers. And so we're out there trying to advocate with, utilities and grid operators and regulators about how to make the existing markets or utility territories more attractive to demand response, and hopefully have it make sense for the utilities and the grid operators, as well as a viable path for consumers or CNI energy users that want to participate.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that throughout today, some of those barriers that we look at, because ideally this whole map would be shaded blue. Ideally there will be markets for flexibility, and we're working on that as an NL team, but we can use this whole ecosystem of innovation of utilities, consumers, policymakers to keep pushing that forward.
Yeah, there's a question here also about the typical DR income split range. So this is bringing up the idea of how do customers typically get compensated for demand response, and this concept of split, whether there's a full rate that the grid operator pays or the utility pays for demand response, and then we share a portion of that with the customer. It really depends, and ultimately what that split has to be is what is the payment that a customer needs to earn in order for it to make financial sense for them to participate, and then also be able to cover our costs. So there's not so much of a income split range that's like specific. It really depends on the underlying rate and the demand response that particular customer is expected to provide under the program parameters for whatever demand response program they're participating in. I don't know, Molly, if you want to add any more detail to that, but that's sort of, I think.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, and I think the construct of all these regions in the US is unique in that every region has its own different rules, pricing, how is pricing constructed, how are customers compensated. So we at NL understand all those nuances, and we help connect and make it simple for customers to say, okay, you can budget for this year and your earnings for demand response. So we're helping make that simple for customers, because there's also a lot of complexity. There's capacity market revenues, utility program revenues, energy revenues, ancillary services revenues. So we create that whole proposal at a customer specific basis to kind of tell you what value at your site and your location you can earn from these types of programs. Okay, so let's dive into our trends. That's kind of our big topic. That was our intro, but we wanted to talk about the trends in the industry right now that are heading the energy space and that are impacting demand response. So Pete is going to start us off with trend number one.
Perfect. Okay, so the first trend we're going to discuss is rising load growth. Not a new topic and certainly not a surprise. We touched on it briefly earlier in the presentation, but this is certainly the hot topic du jour for sure around load growth. So the grid is grappling with unprecedented load growth, and this comes after years of limited demand growth, given what were concurrent efficiency gains to whatever load growth was actually occurring underneath that. But now we're just seeing this surge of demand growth that's outstripping anything that we're able to manage related to efficiency. And this diagram from Wood Mackenzie shows anticipated large load growth by region in the USA from 2024 to 2027. And every region is witnessing increases, but the largest demand increases are seen or expected to be seen in wholesale markets in Texas, ERCOT, and the East Coast, the PJM region, and the Southeast, the CERC region. And so what's driving this growth? A few of the factors, as Molly mentioned previously, are data centers. So data centers are one of the key industries at the forefront of this explosive demand growth, especially in regions like PJM and ERCOT. And these centers use a lot of power, and they need it around the clock. And then we have things like Bitcoin mining, which is certainly growing in popularity and is a huge energy user, and similar to data centers in that sense. But these facilities have a layer of complexity because they're very price-based or price-sensitive to what's happening in the cryptocurrency industry. And so from the grid's perspective, their demand is unpredictable. It's difficult for the grid to plan for them. They can pop up really quickly. They can use a lot of energy very quickly, but they also are flexible. So they add that level of potential when it comes to demand response and capitalizing on that flexibility to the benefit of the grid and to the energy users. And then we have electrification. So we're talking about things like EV home chargers and fleet electrification. Like, while they're predictable, they add a significant amount of load to the system. And then finally, we have new manufacturing or resurging manufacturing. So growing demand from domestically produced goods is adding a significant amount of load to the system. And I want to talk a little bit more about data centers and add a layer of complexity around them that's making it challenging for the grid to plan for adequate supply. So not only are development of new data centers increasing, but the energy use at existing data centers is increasing as well. So a December 2024 report from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory shows that energy demand at US data centers doubled between 2017 and 2023, which was driven by increasing demands for cloud services, streaming, and AI. So according to the Berkeley Lab, energy usage at data centers in the United States could rise from 4.4% in 2023 to as much as 12% in 2028. The growth and evolution of data centers, their massive energy footprint, and new data center development are causing utility load forecasts to surge. And the proliferation of AI models could drastically alter the growth curve. AI queries like ChatGPT require about 10 times the electricity of traditional cloud computing tasks like a typical Google search. And you can see this load growth range represented in this diagram to the right. The Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory predicts future data center growth will range from 325 to 580 terawatt hours by 2028, or 6.7 to 12% of total US energy demand. And so projections vary based on various scenarios to reflect operational practices within the industry, including the use of generative AI technology. But companies are investing heavily in AI. As you can see here, Apple recently announced a $500 billion investment in AI servers in Texas, which are set to open in 2026. And this is just one of many examples that we've seen and will continue to see moving forward.
Yeah, Pete, I wanted to add one thing that I was reading recently. I know we said that the US demand response market is roughly 33 gigawatts or so. And there was a study from Duke University that came out about this data center increase that said that with these loads, if they can be flexible and use the strategies that you're going to talk about in a second, we could see an increase of the demand response market by about 100 gigawatts. So this is looking pretty alarming, but it's also a lot of opportunity. And that's, I think, what Pete's going to talk about in a second, where we can unlock this load growth and use it for flexibility.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, demand response is a key strategy for data centers to help the grid accommodate surges in load and for these customers to manage their energy costs. So by being flexible with energy consumption during peak periods, these facilities can earn payments for providing load relief. In this way, the grid doesn't need to worry about where to find new supply. They incentivize more efficient and dynamic use of existing assets. And one way to do this, which is exemplified here, is the example of Google using their data centers and how they're using their data centers, where they're shifting loads when called upon by the grid. So when Google is notified of a demand response event in a particular region, they activate an algorithm that reduces non-urgent tasks, reschedules them for after the event, or reroutes them to another data center in another region that's not facing energy constraints. So their approach is both time-based and location-specific and optimizes energy use when and where it's most impactful. In this way, they provide support to the grid while ensuring their essential services are not interrupted. So now let's hone in on ways that specific utilities are addressing peak demand challenges. So Salt River Project is a great example. So we've been working with Salt River Project since 2009. So we developed a demand response program with Salt River Project in 2009 when they were facing some increased load growth and peak demand, managing peak demand challenges. And that program was in place until 2015, at which point they no longer had the same resource need and were able to put the program essentially on hold. So the program stopped. They no longer needed that demand response. And then in 2019, with increasing demand driven by warmer temperatures and greater cooling needs, and then in 2020 with significant migration to the Southwest during COVID and following COVID, and then also with some renewed manufacturing in the Southwest coming from things like the CHIPS Act, they have a huge amount of resource need, and we've worked with them to design a program that includes multiple products where we've been able to get an even larger number of customers participating today than we did in the past relatively quickly, and as a short time frame. And today, Salt River Project has a dynamic demand response program that's helping them to manage their peak demand needs. And as I mentioned, these programs were quick to deploy, easily scalable, offering greater agility than investing in, solely new steel in the ground, capital intensive resources that, will be there whether they need them in 5 years or not. And so I think it just exemplifies a great example here of, how other utilities and grid operators can capitalize off of the benefits of demand response in light of this particular challenge.
Okay, now we're going to dive into trend number 2. Trend number 2, data access hindering virtual power plant VPP growth. So it wouldn't be a demand response webinar if we didn't talk about VPPs, which is a very trendy term in the market right now. It's how we refer to our demand side resources. A virtual power plant is a collection of all of these loads into a reliable aggregated resource. So we at Enel, we recruit customers that are industrial, commercial. They may have battery energy storage or EV charging, heat pumps, agricultural pumps. They may have behind the meter solar or batteries. And we're able to aggregate all those different technologies as electrification increases that Pete just talked about into these virtual power plant resources. So the grid doesn't have to worry about dispatching individual sites. They can dispatch this virtual power plant, and we as Enel will ensure that our aggregated commitment is met. So we may commit into the market 100 megawatts of thousands of sites, and then we can aggregate those together. This is a huge benefit, like I mentioned before, for the grid, because it adds, critical services like capacity, energy, ancillary services. It balances intermittency of renewables. It is a key resource for customers because they're able to generate revenue and reduce costs and be smarter about when they're using energy and the environment. So oftentimes a VPP is going to replace a peaking power plant, which is often fossil fuel or coal-based generation, just given the way the markets function. So if we're able to dispatch a virtual power plant instead of a real carbon intensive one, we are providing a much more sustainable reliability solution. So a big question we get, and this was a question earlier that we addressed, is why are there not more VPPs? Why aren't we using this technology more? And we'll talk a little bit about some of the regulatory barriers, but there's a really big one when it comes to data. So having the right data is critical for us being able to participate in the energy markets. We need to be able to demonstrate a baseline of what demand would have been there and the post action of dispatch, what is actually there, to demonstrate the real value that negative demand provides to the system. And we want to be able to do that across all different asset types, including these new technologies like data centers and EV chargers and homes that are being electrified. So to do that, we need standardized data access. So this is kind of a nitty-gritty point, but it's really critical to the growth of VPPs, where utilities today have inconsistent data standards. So a company like Enel has to do a lot of manual work to get that data to be able to offer our customers these programs. So we really need a unified approach to make that data more accessible. Standardized APIs are being developed. There's something called Green Button Connect. I want to give a shout out to Mission Data, which is a trade organization we work with who advocates for these types of changes in standardization. But we need to move faster if we want to leverage these technologies today. There's a lot of barriers to entry, specifically for small loads, that we need to address if we want to expand VPPs in the market. All right, so let's take a pause. We did 2 trends to go with a few more questions. We see a few in the chat. So here's one related to this topic that just came in. Why are so many companies still using spreadsheets for collecting and analyzing data? When will spreadsheets become a thing of the past? That's almost like I asked that question. I ask myself that every day. That's exactly this issue we're talking about. A lot of utilities are designed to, pay and charge customers for consumption and build power plants. So they don't have this robust digital smart grid infrastructure to leverage data for these demand side services. So there's a lot of evolving we need to do. We're kind of hamstrung by the market regulations and the utility capabilities to be able to provide these services. So if the market requires we submit data with a spreadsheet, that's what we have to do to comply. So there really needs to be this digital focus on getting things more streamlined, more real time, so that the market can catch up with where the sophistication of the loads are.
Yeah, and to add to that, I will say, like on the utility side, where we're working with vertically integrated utilities as their exclusive provider of commercial industrial demand response, we are using some of these new APIs to be able to capture data from the utility for settlement, and then using that same API to push data back to performance data and other data back to the utility, so that it's in a more automated and digital way versus having to specifically send back and forth spreadsheets. So we're seeing where we have that control and ability to work directly in a partnership with the utility. We've made that happen. Where it's been more challenging has been in some of the the larger wholesale markets, where we're one of many players in the market, all hopefully advocating for similar change. I see a question here about what are the most effective demand side strategies organizations are using to avoid peak charges amid this growing demand. And not that this is not a non-answer by any means, but we work with an incredibly heterogeneous population of commercial industrial energy users. We've enabled more than 20,000 commercial industrial facilities to participate in demand response to date, and that runs across a broad range of industries, from pretty much anything you can imagine, from a steel mill to a big box retail store, to a thread manufacturer, and a hotel with EV chargers. It really depends on the individual facility, and that's really what we have our experience in, and where it really requires a conversation with each individual customer. It's really a consultative recruitment process, a technical recruitment process, where we're looking at that customer's operations, what their energy usage is, and really identifying for that particular customer what works well. But we have worked with such a broad range of different customer types that we are able to bring that experience to bear when we're working with a new customer, to help say, well, there's in this type of industry, your size, your customer type, here's what these customers typically do for demand response of this program type, because we are operating in more than 75 programs around the world. So what works in one program for one customer might be different than what works for the same customer in another program, or same customer type. So it's a technical process, but we have the experience and the data to help support pretty much any customer that wants to do demand response, find a way to do it in a cost-effective way.
Yeah, and I know part 2 of this question mentions how do you balance the need for operational continuity with the pressure to curtail during system peaks. So piggybacking off what you said, Pete, like that's a big component of how we design what we call an energy reduction plan for a customer, is making sure that there is operational continuity, there is safety that we consider, there is occupancy comfort. So just like a small example of a cool one we do is we can play with the set points of chillers or freezers in a grocery store, and then we can curtail half the lights in an aisle but leave half of them on. Things like that, where we can design really cool strategies to curtail usage, or cycle your set points on your HVAC unit, or curtail one manufacturing line but keep the other going, so that customers who really care about that continuity, they have that ability to do so. It's a lot of education we find with these customers. Like Pete said, we can go to them and say, hey, if you could work a little bit smarter here, here's some of your data, here's how you could save money, here's how you could be more efficient, here's how you could earn in these flexibility programs.
And I think it's also fundamentally making the business case. That you know,
That's our job to do for all you customers.
yeah,
Yeah.
even if it is, ensuring operational continuity, or maybe if your energy reduction plan requires some curtailment of your production, making sure that what you stand to earn from participating in demand response is going to be greater than whatever cost you may incur from that participation, because we want customers that it makes financial sense, it's a good business decision, and those customers will be reliable performers as part of their participation in any program.
All right, cool. Let's move on. We'll have more time for questions, so keep them coming. Let's move on to
All right.
trend 3.
Trend 3, let's talk about aging infrastructure. We touched on that earlier, so we'll dive into that a little bit deeper now. So our grid is old. 70% of the lines and transformers in the US are more than 25 years old. And this outdated energy infrastructure is creating bottlenecks in power delivery, as this infrastructure from the 70s and 80s was not built for the low growth and diverse energy resources we're seeing today. And aging infrastructure is struggling to keep up with today's energy needs, especially in bustling cities and areas leaning heavily on power located hundreds of miles away. So in addition, it's struggling to handle the increased adoption of renewable energy, the mismatch between aging infrastructure and current energy needs, plus this D+ report card grade from the American Society of Civil Engineers highlights an urgent need for modernization and innovative approaches to grid management. Aging infrastructure raises concerns and risks across generation, transmission, and distribution. And you can see in this table here that there are a wide range of issues that can arise from unplanned outages, mechanical issues, increased maintenance costs, reduction in load carrying capacity, line losses, and a whole bunch more. So it's not efficient for the grid to remain status quo. Key to that. That's the key. And demand response is a critical tool to address these challenges, and one that, as we discussed earlier, is really quick or fast to market and cost effective to deploy when compared to traditional generation resources. It provides immediate localized solutions that reduce congestion and strain on the grid, making the grid more capable of handling fluctuating energy needs at the location and time it's needed. And this is really important as more renewables interconnect with the grid. Demand response can be dispatched quickly to respond to variation in renewable power generation that fluctuates based on weather or the time of day. And while new generation does get built out, both renewable and traditional alike, demand response can provide a faster market solution for needed capacity today as we await traditional generation to come online down the road. There are several types of demand response programs, and these programs deliver different types of services to the grid. First, we have kind of the traditional or most common capacity demand response. And this is a resource that's used to ensure there's enough supply on an annual basis to meet expected demand, plus any reserve margin that the system or utility may require. It alleviates grid-wide constraints, helps meet peak demand, and acts as emergency resources during unexpected supply or demand spikes. Participants in these programs agree to reduce energy use when called upon, and they earn payments for both being on standby and then typically also for any actual reductions during events. Then we have ancillary service demand response, which operate more in real time. These programs offer high value. They are real-time services to address localized grid issues, such as operating reserves or frequency response. And they require companies to respond within as little as a few seconds, and for shorter duration events, than is what's typical for capacity demand response.
Yeah, and this is an important one, Pete. I don't think people often make the connection between transmission and distribution upgrades and demand response. But if you think about it, we need some way to get power where it's needed, right? So say you build all these wind farms in West Texas and you have load growth in Houston, you need that power to get from the windmills to Houston to be used. And that requires a lot of transmission build out, which is really expensive. It has to travel long distances. It's a big cost to consumers. That's typically spread out over the ratepayers, that cost of upgrades. Whereas say you have a constraint in Houston and instead you have all these flexible loads in Houston, the power never needs to get there. You can curtail that capacity and you can have a little bit more of that flexibility versus always needing to build out new transmission distribution infrastructure. So we definitely need to modernize, but we need to think about the demand side when we're thinking about where we need to modernize, so we're not overbuilding new transmission.
Yeah. So across the US, we're seeing announcements about retirements of coal-fired power plants, which is signaling this major shift in the energy landscape. But there are capacity gaps to fill with these changes, and demand response can help fill this gap, offering a reliable, cost-effective, and fast-to-market solution to traditional generating resources. We're having discussions with utilities across the country around this specific issue, most notably in MISO and SPP, about how to address these retirements and leverage demand response as a strategic alternative. So we can take another quick look here at questions now that we've come to the end of this section, and see what we have for some additional questions.
About what kind of industrial manufacturing customers allow you to control their production lines and have those partnerships work smoothly? I think that's a great question. We were talking about operational continuity and this customized plan. There are some customers that are comfortable with an advisor like Enel controlling their operations to a set point. So say we define, okay, if we get this signal or if pricing reaches this level, we can curtail production line A, B, and C safely from your centralized BMS. We'll send an automated signal, good to go. The customer gets buy-in, it's all automated, it's nice for them. HVAC curtailment is even easier, where they may not even feel it, but we're controlling their operations remotely and automatically. We want to get more in that direction because that really unlocks even more flexibility, and it's less for the customer to actually do. But recognizing your question, some customers are not comfortable with that. They don't want anyone else controlling their operations. They don't want that automated control. So in some cases, we can actually develop a notification method where the customer can confirm, okay, go ahead, do the plan we talked about. We call that pre-authorized versus authorization needed. And then if they authorize us during that day, we can execute on that automated curtailment. So that's one check and balance we can have where we can execute on that pre-agreed to plan. And then if not, the customer will insist on doing it remotely or doing it themselves. And sometimes that's also very quick. They can get a notification from us, or we'll send a strobe signal to their manufacturing floor or text message, and they'll immediately hit their centralized control program that says, okay, demand response is being called curtail. So that works really well for customers too. So it's all about comfort level. Markets like ancillary services markets that are faster responding, probably not the best fit for those customers that need to do things manually. But so we're trying to constantly get more of that comfort level, that security with customers so that they know if we have these plans in place, we can safely do curtailment in an automated way and you can continue your operations. So a lot of it is getting that buy-in up front.
Yeah, and I'd add that so some of it's dictated by the program. If it's a really fast response program, there may not be any choice except to be, fully automated. But at the same time, we really want to leave or give the customer the option to do what works best for them. So if they really need, or if they're not comfortable with, or they need some way to authorize that, or want to do it manually, then we're looking for programs that fit what their needs are. But ultimately, finding that customer program fit is really important, because you don't want customers in a program that aren't a good fit for that, aren't capable to do that. And that's really just one more example of how this consultative technical recruitment enablement portion of what we do is so critical to being able to deliver reliable demand response, and for customers to achieve the reductions they're expecting and the earnings they're expecting, and utilities and grid operators getting the resources that they need and are expecting as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, maybe we move on to the next one. Again, we'll pause for questions again at the end, but let's continue. We're on trend number 4 of 5. Trend number 4, severe weather creates grid strain and power outages. So this is probably not a surprise to all of you on the call, but we are seeing an increased frequency of extreme weather events. Oftentimes in an extreme weather event, we also see a surge in electricity. Oftentimes it's coupled with record peak demands on certain systems. So that's because if it's really hot out, there may be a higher AC load demand, or if there's a limit on supply due to this extreme weather, there's a high imbalance on the system that can cause issues and constraints. So this is an urgent issue that continues to compound. The NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information confirmed in their 2024 report that there were 27 individual weather and climate disasters with at least 1 billion in damages, which trailed only the record-setting 28 events in 2023. So we're seeing more and more of these events. They're causing damages to this infrastructure that Pete just talked about. They're causing power surges, and it's a real additional strain on the system that the grid operators and utilities have to manage. I saw recently Hurricane Helene, the estimated damage is 53 billion in North Carolina alone. So these storms and these events have a real impact on our system, and they're causing a lot of load fluctuations and needs for balancing. So demand response can also be a really good tool in these scenarios as well. So I'll describe one that's kind of a classic example from 2022. This was over Labor Day weekend in California. And sometimes we'll have, an extreme event that happens as a one-off. Sometimes these are sustained hot temperatures or sustained cold temperatures. And the grid may be able to handle 1 or 2 days of this extreme pressure, but over 5 days in a row, generators need to go on maintenance, or we just can't handle that level of stress. So when we have these sustained issues, we often see a lot of strain on the system and demand response events. So we saw multiple consecutive days of 110-degree temperatures. There was, again, like I said, a record peak demand set during this event. And we were deployed over the course of 4 days to provide relief to these peaks. And you can see on the top graph, this real red effect of the peak being shaved and demand coming down versus what was forecasted. And we were dispatched for multiple hours at a time. We provided over 100 megawatts of load relief in very specific areas. So when the grid is under stress during these extreme climate events, it's really important to leverage those flexible demand resources. Another example is Winter Storm Elliott, which a number of you may have heard of this as well. This was in December 2022. It was an extreme cold front that brought across the Midwest and the Northeast. It caused a lot of natural gas wells to freeze and potential for widespread power outages. So we saw emergency demand response events in PJM, ICE New England, and TVA. This truly was a perfect storm, no pun intended, but it was around the holiday season. So there was a lack of an ability to forecast the peak load that we would see. Traditionally, holidays might actually see lower load as manufacturing takes breaks or operations are edited, but this was also a record peak demand in addition to these natural gas related challenges. TVA experienced the highest 24-hour electricity demand in its history. And the other thing I wanted to emphasize here is Winter Storm Elliott showed how interconnected our North America grids are. So PJM was exporting to TVA. MISO, even though it was experiencing constraints, was also exporting to its neighboring grids. So when there are these issues, even if they're very local, they can impact all the neighboring systems because it impacts how imports and exports can happen. So if one grid experiences an issue during extreme weather, it can impact others as well, which can trigger emergencies, blackouts, brownouts, and demand response is a great tool to help balance the system. All right, last trend we're talking about today is capacity accreditation. So this is another topic that I would say is a barrier to growth of VPPs and flexibility resources. Capacity accreditation rules are shaping how resources are valued and integrated into the grid in this energy transition. So I'll start by talking about PJM. In the 2025-2026 base residual auction, PJM changed how it modeled resources for reliability. And it implemented this new concept called ELCC, or the effective load carrying capacity of resources. And this was meant to model of how often are these resources available to respond and be deployed. And this was actually as a result of Winter Storm Elliott that I just spoke about. So as a result, PJM modified the accreditation values of all resource types, including demand response, to account for how they show up during these extreme events or during 24/7 participation. And unfortunately, these new rules have undervalued the services that demand response provides to the grid. So demand response resources are currently valued at 77% in the PJM market, which decreases the amount that the market values DR. And our big ask from Enel and our big push has been that demand response needs to be recognized for all the value it provides to the system. So all the things we've talked about today, the cost efficiency, the lack of infrastructure, lack of interconnection queue needs, how quickly we can get demand response resources online, how there's zero carbon resources and they can provide long duration relief during during grid emergencies. So all these things really need to go into the value in the market. And we want to continue to advocate to make sure that flexibility resources receive appropriate treatment in the markets against other technologies. So in good news, Enel has a brilliant team that has decades of experience in these markets, and we're continuously advocating with grid operators and utilities and on behalf of our customers to push for these changes and make sure that we can grow load flexibility. We're being treated fairly in the market. Customers are earning as much as they can for their flexibility. So recent changes that we're still awaiting on approval on, but are forecasting that this ELCC rating in the future for 2027, 2028 could change from 69% to 94%. So this is a hugely positive change. Thanks to effective advocacy. And it's really was done by proving that demand response is a 24/7 resource. It's available at all times, and it can really respond to these long duration emergencies and provide that real value to the system.
Great.
All right. I think we can pause for questions once more, and then we'll kind of do our last wrap-up slide.
Well, I was just looking at the time, and I know we only have a couple minutes, so
maybe I'll just wrap it up,
and then we'll go to exactly. I think that's good.
We got a lot of good questions in the chat, so that sounds great.
Okay, so last one here. How can we increase adoption of demand response? I'll just go quickly through this. So there are plenty of things we can do, and kind of depends on what your role is. So if you are a C&I business, let's find out what flexibility you have in your operations, so you can monetize them. Or if you're already participating, let's find ways to maybe help you up your game. We're happy to chat with you to help maximize your DR participation. If you're a utility, if you don't have DR yet, let's start a discussion to see what's possible. If you already have DR but want to offer more, let's also chat about that. If you're a policymaker, kind of going back to what Molly just said, let's work together to figure out how DR can get appropriate accreditation in the energy markets. Work with a curtailment service provider like us and other stakeholders to listen to concerns and the value that DR can provide with the grid from our experience. We've been operating doing demand response for over 2 decades at this point. So just the history of what we have experienced and lessons learned, happy to share that and use that as valuable tools for policy efforts. And with the help of policymakers, we can accelerate the growth of demand response in every market in North America. So Enel acts as a curtailment service provider, as I mentioned, for both C&I participants as well as utilities. And we are the global leader in demand response, which means we bring experience, expertise, and the backing of a global company to the table. We identify and initiate new demand response opportunities that enable participants to fully capitalize on achievable revenue and available revenue streams with accurate and transparent representation of earnings potential for these customers. And we develop and deploy successful demand response programs in partnership with utilities, like we've talked about today, with total lifecycle management of portfolios to achieve reliable resource performance that's cost effective. So if you want to chat with us, drop us a note at the email address listed here, or let us know in the Q&A if you'd like to talk more. So thanks so much to everybody for the time today. We'll take a few more questions here for the last 5 minutes we have.
All right, one that came in kind of early. Are there examples of hybrid programs that combine utility simplicity with wholesale market value? That's a great question. And that goes to this concept of what I call the value stack. So in a lot of regions, like New York, for example, you can offer load flexibility into the wholesale capacity and energy market, and also participate in the local utility programs, say Con Ed, and those dispatch signals are likely going to be different. So you're participating in two programs at once, and you're getting that kind of full value stack. So it's not entirely what you asked in terms of, are there wholesale markets that are as simple as a utility program? Not really. Most wholesale markets are pretty complex, pretty onerous to participate in. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of expertise that goes into that. But the value stack is a really awesome opportunity in certain regions where flexibility is valued, not just for wholesale market participation, but also for a distribution or a peak shaving need from that local utility. So that's what we also try to push for, to get the maximum possible value of flexibility in a region.
And I'd say that, like, with vertically integrated utilities in more regulated parts of the country, historically, they had sort of a single demand response program or an interruptible rate that, you had to do everything required by that program to participate, which meant that, like, if you were a customer that was, only really able to provide capacity, but the program also required you to deliver some energy through, pretty regular peak shaving events or things like that, it might limit that customer from participating. So looking to the wholesale market example, where a customer can sort of participate in one, none, all of the energy capacity ancillary service programs offered for demand response, we're starting to see that similar model take off with utilities, where they're offering a suite of products that cover a range of grid services for their customers that are unlocking a much greater volume of total demand response than they were achieving with just a single product in the past.
Absolutely. Yep. Should we try to do one more, Pete, or maybe we can squeeze one more in?
Sure. Let's see here. I think I saw one. There was one about policy. Okay, what policy or investment signals are needed to ensure aging infrastructure doesn't limit DER and DR participation? And I think the examples that we've seen, whether maybe it's New York Rev or some of the other, state regulatory processes or policy advancements, have been just around making sure when you're making these decisions about transmission, distribution, supply side resources, that they're not done in a vacuum without considering demand side resources as well. As long as demand response DERs are considered as part of the equation, that is, and they're put on equal playing field, equal footing to more traditional supply side resources or traditional transmission distribution, then that's all that's really needed. So it's really just about consideration, and demand response isn't looking for additional or preferential treatment by any means. Just put demand response on equal playing field with those other traditional resources or infrastructure.
Well said, Pete. Nothing to add from me. Good way to wrap us up.
Exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth. Well, I thank the attendees earlier in the chat for providing such high-level questions for today's discussion. I know we had a lot more come in over the past couple of minutes, and we are already receiving fantastic feedback from those attending today. So thank you, Molly and Pete, for the work you put into today's event. Don't forget, this will be available on demand, and attendees will get a recap of all of the questions along with the answers. So thank you again for being on with us. If you have time, please fill out the survey that's going to pop up on your screen as soon as we end the event. We appreciate any and all feedback, as it helps us plan for future events. And at this point, we're going to conclude the webinar and have a wonderful rest of the day.